welcome aboard.
Please welcome to the stage Axios healthcare reporter, Maya Goldman.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out and joining us this morning for some great conversations on how to solve America's caregiving crisis. My name is Maya Goldman. I'm one of the co-authors of Axios Vitals, our healthcare newsletter. Be sure to subscribe if you don't already. For those in the room today and for those watching online, you can follow along using the hashtag Axios Events. I'm honored to be joined by our first guest, who is the president of the National Domestic Workers Alliance and a nationally recognized expert in elder and family care. Please welcome Ai-jen Poo. Good morning. Great to have you here today.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone.
So I'm going to get right into it. The news of the month, of the week, is the new administration coming in and the election. What does a Trump presidency mean for family caregiving? What do we know about his picks for HHS and CMS, RFK Jr. and Dr. Oz? What do we know about their views on the role of caregiver in healthcare?
Okay, it's really early in the morning for this question. But why don't I start by saying Happy Family Caregivers Month to everyone. Do we have any family caregivers in the room? Okay. Well, thank you for what you do. We are here because we have huge, huge challenges that we want to solve for you. And your work is so essential to our economy and society, and only going to be more so going forward. I think that, the two big pain points that I've heard from family caregivers around the country are the emotional stressors having to do with caregiving, and then the financial stressors having to do with caregiving. And when it comes to the emotional stressors, one of the pressures is having to go balance caring for a loved one and all the other responsibilities like work. And one of the things that we have been pushing for as a care movement has been paid family medical leave, so that more people have the ability to take time away from work to care for their loved ones. We're one of a few countries in the world that doesn't have paid leave, and it would hugely benefit family caregivers. That does not seem to be a priority of this new administration. We have heard that there is some interest in doing a family caregiver tax credit, but we have also heard that there's a desire to cut Medicaid, which is the program through which most people who need long-term care actually have access to it, which would have huge impacts on family caregivers. And we've also heard a lot about immigration. And usually when we think about caregiving, we don't immediately associate it with immigration, but about a third of our care workforce in our country is immigrant. And so it would have a devastating impact on our care workforce and our caregiving systems if suddenly immigrants disappeared.
Yeah.
So those are some of the things I'm watching. I will say the family caregiver tax credit that the Trump campaign talked about, I think, is like a $5,000 to $6,000 tax credit for family caregivers, and that would certainly benefit some caregivers. I think that right now the average cost of home care is between $60,000 and $280,000 a year, depending on the level of care you need. And the average cost of a room in a nursing home is $100,000 per year. So it doesn't make a dent in the actual financial stressors for family caregivers the way that some other ideas, like investing in and strengthening Medicaid, might. But I think, or Medicare, for example. But I think that it would certainly benefit some family caregivers.
Yeah. I want to dig a little deeper into immigration, obviously a priority for the incoming administration. What are some opportunities and challenges of immigration reform for caregivers?
Well, right now, the care workforce, as many of you probably know, there's what people call a workforce crisis, workforce shortage. There's been, in the direct care sector, there's just been a huge challenge in attracting and retaining caregivers to support families. And that is because the quality of the jobs has been so difficult to address. So we have the median annual income of home care workers in our country is $22,000 per year. So there's huge rates of turnover. People can't sustain in these jobs and take care of themselves and their families too. So there's been a big push to try to raise wages and improve the quality of jobs in the sector. But the truth is that these are the fastest growing occupations in our entire economy because the demand is huge. Every day, 10,000 of us turn 65. And by the year 2040, the numbers of people over the age of 85 will double. So the need for care is only going to continue to grow. And there is no way that we will meet our need collectively as a country without two things. One is improving the quality of jobs and raising wages for this workforce, and also welcoming and embracing the role of immigrants in this workforce. There's just no way that we can take care of the people we love without a strong workforce, including immigrants.
Yeah, those are some pretty stark numbers.
Yeah.
What needs to change in the physical infrastructure of our society to make room for all these people that are going to need care and the people that are going to care for them?
Well, I love that you called it infrastructure. Senator Casey said on the floor last year, he said, some people need a bridge or a tunnel to get to work, and other people need childcare, and other people need home care. And it really underscores how caregiving is really an economic question, because honestly, with 105.6 million family caregivers in our country, all of those caregivers are the workforce. That's who makes our economy run. So I would say that we have never as a country fully invested in the infrastructure of care. Most countries, for example, other G7 countries spend about $14,000 per year per child in investments on early childhood and the well-being of children. We spend as a country about $500 a year. So we're just really far behind in the kind of investments we make in children, in older adults, people with disabilities, compared to other G7 countries. And so I would say things like investing in making childcare more affordable and accessible, raising the wages for early childhood educators and childcare workers, and the same in direct care. Making sure that there are programs that help people afford the long-term care that we will all inevitably need if we're lucky, right? Right now, if you need long-term care, you might think that Medicare will cover it until you need it and you try to apply and you realize it doesn't. And so you have two options. You essentially pay out of pocket, or you completely deplete your assets to be eligible for Medicaid. And that is a huge invisible driver of inequality, actually. So the fact that there's millions of us in between who earn too much to be eligible for Medicaid, but not enough to pay out of pocket for long-term care, it's a huge challenge that we can actually solve for with investments in programs, like extending Medicare to cover the cost of long-term care, raising wages for care workers. Actually, in the American Rescue Plan Act, there was an investment in Medicaid home and community-based services that every single one of our states, all 50 states, took up that funding, and almost 30 of them, 27 of them, used that funding to enhance and raise wages for the direct care workforce that works through Medicaid. It gives you a sense of just how urgent and important it is that we invest in these programs and in this workforce, and our governors know it, our Medicaid directors in states know it, and so I would say that that is a big priority.
Yeah, you mentioned states. Medicaid obviously is a federal state program. There's been a lot of focus on federal policy, and obviously we're in DC, so that's something to focus on here, but a lot of this work happens at the state level, right?
Yep.
What are you watching for next year in state houses on care policy?
So I'm continuing to watch states that are including raising wages in their budgets for home care workers and other direct care workers. And in fact, in North Carolina and Georgia, my organization has been doing the advocacy to raise wages in North Carolina for both direct care workers and child care workers. And a couple years ago, we got a commitment from the state legislature to offer a $4 an hour raise, which is a huge transformational investment. And in Georgia, we got the governor to include a wage enhancement in the budget, the governor's budget. And I believe that there are opportunities in states across the country to do this work, to strengthen the workforce, regardless of what is going on here in DC. And then there's states all over this country that are passing paid family and medical leave. And we're looking forward to Michigan potentially being one in the lame duck session this year. Illinois will strengthen, and Illinois could pass a paid leave program. In California, they're looking at long-term care and creating a benefit for long-term care. And actually, this election cycle, a number of ballot initiatives passed that raise taxes in counties to fund care. And so I think you're seeing that this is an issue that voters really care about and are willing to vote for. And so hopefully we'll be able to make progress in states in an ongoing way.
Yeah, and that can make a big difference in people's lives at the local level.
Exactly, yep.
We talk about caregivers. There are professional caregivers and family caregivers. How do those two groups work together, and what do we need to see improved on the way that the healthcare system and professional caregivers interact with family caregivers?
Well, one of the things I think is that the healthcare system has always undervalued both family caregivers and the frontline home care and direct care workers. And if we actually really invested in the role of both of those players in the caregiving team, I think we could prevent so many unnecessary hospitalizations and rehospitalizations. We could probably address so much waste in the healthcare system. I always say that the best prevention is access to good caregiving. And that really is with family caregivers and direct care workers who are on the front lines. And so I think more programs that train family caregivers, that offer respite care, where we're thinking about family caregivers and direct care workers as a team, right? That's the future. And they're going to be in the trenches and know so much about what consumers and patients need. And that information is gold for healthcare providers and for the system as a whole.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What is your message to caregivers that are watching today, maybe, or watching online, that are, trying to figure out how to make it all work?
I would say that, I think caregivers are having an incredible moment of visibility that is not an accident. Caregivers have been activated, and since the pandemic, I think we have been very loud about our experiences and the need to support and invest in caregiving. And this movement for care is continuing to grow all over this country, so you are not alone. There's 105.6 million of us, an undeniable force for change. And we will continue to grow this movement and push for the solutions that we need and deserve, because it's also not just about us, it's about the future of the economy, the future of our health and well-being as a society is so much connected to our ability to support caregivers. So we are powerful as caregivers, and we are, I think, going to be the generation that changes how this country supports caregiving for generations to come.
Well, we are out of time, but that's a great note to end it on. Thank you so much. Sit tight. We have more great conversations coming up. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Introducing our View from the Top moderator and Axios publisher, Nicholas Johnston.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Nicholas Johnston, the publisher of Axios. Thank you so much for being here. I love our events, the physical manifestation of our journalism. We get to see that all of you are real people. You get to see that we are real people, not robots behind the newsletter. So we're very grateful you're all here. Also super grateful for Otska, our partner, for making today's conversation possible. We have a brief video from them, and I'll be right back.
We aren't in a society that is built to support caregivers and the people that they care for.
You do this whole live the American dream and, make sure that you save and have your 401k and, do all of these things. And mommy was set. Like, she has her Social Security, she has her pension, and it's still not enough.
There's so much self-defeat. And all the while, you're losing the person who you counted on the most.
It feels like it's crushing, and it's just the beginning.
And some people live with this disease for decades.
You have to find the hoops to jump through, and care is not cheap. So the easiest thing for a lot of people is to keep their loved one at home.
I'm not saying I'm giving up my career, but I've had to pause and not follow some of the things that my peers would have done, because I said no, because she deserves to be prioritized.
It all makes you feel like a failure, seeing how expensive care is, wanting to hire someone and not having the funds. All of that makes you feel like you just aren't showing up in a way that you should.
I feel like we are one major house repair away from devastation.
Thinking about managing the time, thinking about managing finances and money, thinking about how to get the biggest bang for my visits home. There was never any rest.
You're hanging on for dear life.
Caregivers are the most resilient human beings on this planet.
And now I'm very excited to welcome to the stage for a View from the Top conversation, Otska's Vice President of Corporate Affairs, Deborah Barrett. Deborah, welcome to the Axios stage. Good morning. How are you?
Good.
Those are such interesting personal stories, but what's also fascinating to me is the numbers behind it. Otska sponsored some research with Columbia University. I just want to pull the numbers out here. That showed 50 million family caregivers in the United States perform more than $750 billion worth of labor each year. When you saw those numbers, what was your reaction?
Well, first, good morning, and thank you for having me. I just want to start by saying that I'm really excited to be here for today's event, to focus on a really important issue of caregivers, understanding their breadth, their impact, and the challenges they face. That video, I think, gives you a sense of it, and I'm excited about the conversations ahead. I was also very inspired by the previous conversation. On this point of, chances are that everybody in this room has either been a caregiver, knows a caregiver, et cetera.
Or will become one.
Or will become one. But we don't talk enough about it. And that's what this report from Columbia that you're citing, which we were really excited to be involved in, was about. It was about putting some numbers and some context around who are the unpaid family caregivers. In November, National Family Caregiver Month, it seems an appropriate time to talk about it. And the answer to your question is I was sort of blown away.
Yeah.
Right? $873 billion worth of labor. If family caregiving were a company or an entity, that'd be the largest revenue generating company in the world, right? We're talking about more than Walmart, more than Amazon. Pretty incredible. The other thing I will just note, I think, from this report is who are these caregivers? About a quarter of the caregivers are individuals who are caring for loved ones who have Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia. And they're about a quarter of them, but the labor that they represent is about 40%. So it's a disproportionate amount. And the last thing I would also just say about this report is 61% of caregivers are women. And they are sandwich generation. We've talked about this term before, but caring for aging parents and young kids. And so there's so many issues there and so much to talk about.
So like a question on people's mind though is like, Otska, you're a pharmaceutical company. So tell me a little bit about the connection of why this is such an important issue for you folks.
Yeah, thank you. So Otska is first and foremost a healthcare company. And if you're a company committed to healthcare, you can't not be thinking about the caregiver. The caregiver is about, it drives what's happening in our healthcare system, drives what's happening in the patient health journey. We also happen to be a company that works in the chronic disease area, serious mental illness, brain disease, kidney disease. And you can imagine that the issues for caregivers with loved ones with chronic diseases are pretty acute. The last thing I would say that really drew us to this is as we started to get into it, we realized how much sacrifice, and you heard a little bit about this from the video, but unpaid caregivers are sacrificing their jobs, their careers, their financial security, their health and well-being. The Columbia report, and this really blew me away, said that every year there's about $28 billion worth of caregiving-induced declines in health. So caregivers are suffering as a result of what it is that they're providing, and that was, we got to do something about this.
Well, so to combat that, like tell a little bit about what Otska does to combat that, to support caregivers in this role.
Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, I guess when we started this, the first thing we did was listen to caregivers. We did some focus groups, some research to really understand a little bit more about their experience. And there is no monolithic experience. There's lots of them.
Yeah.
And to understand where the challenges were where we could make a difference. And I would say that things sort of fell into three categories. The first is making sure that caregivers' voices are heard and that they and their experiences are seen. And I think that's, a big part of why we're here today.
Right.
I'm also really proud Otska has done a lot to develop an online community of caregivers. We have a place on our own website where you can go for resources. We're also very active on all the social media platforms you would imagine. And we are working on a video series where individuals are getting to tell their experience. I would also say, and I'm very excited about this, we are the lead sponsor of an upcoming film that's going to be released in next spring, executive produced by Bradley Cooper, about caregiving. And it is one of the feature films in WIDA's Well-Beings campaign. Yeah. So I know that will, we talk about amplifying and making sure people are being seen. That's the kind of thing that I think.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you're doing a lot. Let's give a little homework call to action for folks in the room. What else can policymakers or industry do to help?
Yeah, well, so let me also just say that I think it would be hard for us to say we're committed to caregiving and not look within our own walls. Otska created a caregiving benefit. I unexpectedly became a caregiver myself last year. And there was a benefit that said, here's support, here's resources, take time off. Makes a big difference, and I would encourage, I think lots of individuals and employers can go there. On the policymaking front, you just heard from my Jim Pu, I think this issue is just too big of a deal, too important. The breadth is too large to not have come at this from multiple ways.
Right.
So there are lots of things that can be done at the state level. We've talked about this in terms of benefits, in terms of flexible work policies, in terms of provider reimbursement, and the federal level. Caregiver tax credit, Medicare and Medicaid reimbursement, other programs like the GUIDE model, which is looking for how to support caregivers. What we really hope from today and this conversation is bringing together some of the experts and people who have creative ideas to figure out what we can do to address some of these issues.
Excellent. We're about to get the hook here. What we love to do at Axios is end on one fun thing. I got my start in this town as a Hill reporter. You got your start in this town as a Hill aide. Tell me your favorite Hill story.
Okay, so there's, as you can imagine, because you've
There's
been
a
on
lot.
the Hill,
I got
there's
one.
a lot of them. I got a lot of them. But I will say, when I first came to Capitol Hill, I worked for Senator Patrick Leahy from Vermont. If anybody knows Senator Leahy, they know two things about him. One, he is a huge deadhead. Two, he is a Batman fan. And I'm not making this up, I was 23 years old, and I got to meet Jerry Garcia in the Senate office building, in Leahy's office. Leahy used to sit on the side of the concerts, dead concerts, and make requests for songs. So it felt pretty cool to get a chance to experience some greatness or be near some greatness myself.
There are some pretty cool senators out there.
There are very cool senators.
Deborah, thanks so much for being here, sharing your expertise. Thanks to Oatska for making today possible. Stick around, the conversation continues.
Thank you.
Please welcome to the stage Axios Pro healthcare policy reporter Victoria Knight.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. Our next guest represents Florida District 3, serving on the House Energy and Commerce Committee and Agriculture Committee. Please welcome Congresswoman Kat Cammack to the stage. Good morning, Congress.
Good morning. All right, before we start, I have to give a disclaimer. I've been battling bronchitis. And so yes, I am drinking a ton of Celsius. I am on a lot of prescriptions to try to combat this, but if I start coughing in the middle, I'm not contagious. I'm just, dealing with whatever this ick is that is going around the hill. So
Thank you for being here. We
Thank you.
appreciate it. So first of all, I just want to start, obviously we're here today to talk about caregiving. I'd love to hear your own story on caregiving, whether that's been you individually helping others or caregiving experiences in your own family.
So, it wasn't until really a couple years ago that I really became aware of the challenges and the struggles. My husband's family had to make the decision, as so many families do, with an aging grandparent of what happens. And my husband being a first responder, he's a firefighter SWAT medic. He has really been on the forefront in our community of dealing with a lot of the underserved populations that don't have someone to help take care. So it was a bit of a wake-up moment when, after 18 years of him running these calls and doing things, helping people up out of bed, people who have fallen down in the middle of the night and call 911, then he started seeing some of the same signs in his grandmother. And then the very difficult family discussion of, okay, are we going to start rotating and taking shifts, and who's going to step in? And then it was, okay, now we're at that point, we need more help. And you start looking at options, and it gets very expensive. And then you start having the very difficult conversation about, okay, all right, who's chipping in? What are we selling? Who's doing what? And now both my husband and I, having been through that experience with his grandmother, we're now looking at our moms and saying, do we build an in-law suite? How can we afford this? This is something we need to plan for. And so I started looking at really the legislative side of it and immediately caught a couple of things, both at the federal and the state level. In the state of Florida, these assisted living facilities can operate under two licenses, either a hospitality license or a medical license. And those that operate under a hospitality license tend to game the system. They rely on EMS and 911 as their means to help their residents. And I found that to be completely inappropriate, right? And what an abuse of the system. And so that's something that we've looked at. But then looking at really how big of an issue this is, and you start talking to people and you realize there's 48 million caregivers in the United States, and nobody's talking about them. So this is when we started really digging in and taking our own experience, which admit, is limited, but it's become kind of a journey and a passion to really give resources and support and a voice to the caregivers that are in the country doing so much.
Right, and you mentioned the legislative angle. So I want to talk about a bill you introduced this year, the Alleviating Barriers for Caregivers Act. Tell me about what that bill would do and what obstacles for caregivers it's trying to, kind of address.
I think of this bill, the ABC Act, as a little bit of a relief valve, right? There is probably nothing more frustrating than dealing with red tape and a federal agency, and putting on Spanx after you just took a shower. The fellows are like, what in the hell?
It's tough.
Yeah. But no, you think about, it's already a frustrating experience, an emotional experience, taking care of a loved one, on top of all the other pressures, especially if you're in that sandwich generation where you have your own family, a young family, and then you're trying to take care of an aging parent. And so then you try to contend with an ABC agency. The bill is very simple. It just seeks to streamline the process, get more resources in front of caregivers, and give them an expedited path to them. Very easy, very simple. Now I say that, but of course this is Washington, and we have an incredible ability to screw things up. So the goal here is to really just get through all that red tape, make sure we're putting those resources in front of those that need them most.
Yeah, and I was curious. I noticed on the Senate side, your Democratic partner is Senator Ed Markey. He's known, to be a pretty progressive senator. Tell me about how that partnership came about and how you see it as a bipartisan issue.
So there's so many issues in Washington particularly that don't get the coverage that they deserve. I think it's because we're living in the age of angertainment, right? And everyone's in the race to the top of Mount Clickmore. So steal it, use it, you want to. Angertainment, Mount Clickmore, you're going to use it. But that has created a spotlight on very contentious issues, but no one's paying attention to this massive mountain of bipartisan issues that impact every single American in every community across the country. And this is one of them. So me being one of the most conservative members in the state of Florida, partnering up with one of the most progressive senators in the country, people were like, And then you start talking about it, and they're like, oh, I guess that makes sense. I mean, you have everyone from J.D. Vance in the Senate on this bill to, Nicole Malliotakis out of New York. I mean, we have Republicans, Democrats, bipartisan, bicameral. And it's because this issue really doesn't belong to a party. This is an American issue, and we're going to solve it as such.
So you're on the Energy and Commerce Committee.
Best damn committee on the Hill. I see the thumbs up. You can always tell who are the former ENCers, right?
There's some ENC pride. So it has jurisdiction over a wide variety of healthcare issues, as I'm intimately aware. Tell me, is caregiving a topic that the committee is hoping to kind of work on next year in the next Congress, and what would that look like?
Absolutely. I mean, and you saw this with President Trump's campaign and the pledge for a tax credit for caregivers. So this is something that is going to be very top of mind. And it's not just the ABC Act. There's a number of different initiatives that we'll be pushing through Energy and Commerce, and then the lesser known, less important committee that is Ways and Means will also have a small role to play here. I'm going to absolutely owe Jason Smith a beer or something because I know it's going to get out that I just said that. No, you have this very unique group of people that all have either a personal story or a deep-rooted connection to somebody who's a caregiver. And I think that's why you're going to find that this issue actually gets a lot of coverage in the Trump administration. I think just solely from the campaign promise, it's going to get a lot of coverage. But then you look at a couple of the other pieces of legislation that have been introduced that haven't made it across the finish line. I see this being a really impactful, bipartisan, bicameral, big win. I'm talking Q1, 2, 3 of next year, not something that gets drug out for years and then makes it across the finish line in the final hour 4 years from now.
Yeah, I mean, mentioning that, we're looking at a GOP trifecta next year. Is this an issue? Obviously, you just talked about what the Trump campaign has kind of put out there. Is this something that you're talking to the Trump campaign about? Is this something that they want to happen imminently? It sounds like it.
Yeah, I mean, again, I reiterate that, J.D. Vance, the incoming vice president, he's one of our originals on the ABC Act. And, a lot of people know his story, famously, the Hillbilly Elegy, and know that he comes from a bit of a rough and tumble background. I come from a bit of a rough and tumble background. And you're seeing a new type of individual in Washington who is serving. Everyone who I talk to has some connection to the caregiving community. And I remember when we came out with this bill, I'll give this as an example. A lot of people said, this is a very niche bill. You don't need to mention this in like town halls. And, it's very like in the Beltway. And I said, no, I'm going to start talking about it. And so I would mention it. I'd be like, and hey, we're working on this bill for caregivers. And you could see it in the audience. There would start to be heads nodding. And then you could see it on someone's face of recognition that they actually felt seen for the first time in a long time, and that somebody was talking about issues that were impacting their everyday that they'll never see in the news. And it really hit people in a way. And so when we started talking about it as a committee, you have this acknowledgement with the change in chairman that healthcare is going to be a top issue. But also when we're talking about healthcare, it's not just the nuts and bolts. It is a shift from this maintenance to prevention mindset. It is a proactive, what are we doing to actually create healthcare rather than sick care? What are we doing to support those that are the providers? And that includes our caregivers. And our caregivers are the first line of defense. We just heard about the workforce challenges, and there's work that we're doing on that front to look at how do we reimagine residency? How do we get more nurse practitioners? How do we get more PAs? How do we get more physicians in the field? How do we get this workforce trained up and ready? Until we can figure that out, caregivers are going to be right there doing the work regardless. So we need to give them the support now because we are absolutely in a position to do so. And the committee, get ready. Hold on to your butts. It's happening.
And you mentioned the sandwich generation, something I've been hearing a lot.
Yeah.
Talking about people that are taking care of both their aging parents and also their children. Do you think it may become a crisis if Congress doesn't do something about this? Just kind of not having, our older parents taken care of or not having options for them.
Absolutely. I don't want to sound dramatic, but I think it's a crisis already. The fact that you have 48 million Americans that are doing what would be the equivalent of $650, $700 billion worth of unpaid work, that's incredible. And you talk to anyone who has been a caregiver for a short period of time or a long period of time, they are emotionally drained, they are financially drained. It is a very stressful situation. But we know that the best outcomes when it comes to the patient and the person who needs the care, it happens to be that those folks have the better outcomes when they're with family. Years ago, I'm sure you all have heard about this book, it's called The Blue Zone. Yeah. And when they talk about the blue zones where people are living the longest, one of the things that they have noted is that it's primary caregivers in the home that help contribute to those better outcomes. So I think that it's not just a fiscal savings that we're seeing, but it's also the patient outcome of having better quality of life, having being in their home, being taken care of by people they know, love, and trust.
By their family, yeah. You mentioned ENC and a lot of upcoming work. I just want to zoom out a little as I'm a health reporter. And what other healthcare issues are you hoping to work on in ENC next year besides caregiving?
Well, you heard me say it. We don't have health care in this country. We have sick care, right? I think really changing the culture of putting an emphasis and incentivizing prevention rather than maintenance is going to be a really revolutionary change. And then how do we incentivize that? How do we basically build that from a legislative standpoint? Where are the incentives? Is it for R&D to get ahead of things, or are we doing a lot of treatments and late stage term treatment, things like that? I think when you look at what Energy and Commerce has done up until this point, a lot of it has been trimming around the edges. And until we have a discussion, and I think we need to have a real family discussion about how broken the system truly is, when you go and you get I could be a very basic procedure done, and you get 76 pages in the mail of a breakdown from you. I see y'all nodding your head. You know what I'm talking about. The 76 pages of a breakdown, and none of it makes sense, and it says, you may owe, you may this. It's very confusing. Everyone gets very frustrated. I think that's why there's such a drive right now towards a direct primary care model to cut out insurance. And so I think we need to have that kumbaya, that come to Jesus meeting with insurers, with providers, and with patients and doctors right at the table saying, this system is not working the way it needs to work. What are we doing to incentivize the prevention, first and foremost? And then what can we do to actually get real treatment for those that find themselves with a chronic disease? So you're gonna see a lot of those types of conversations and things happening. Everyone wants to talk about PBM reform.
Yeah.
Yes,
I know.
Everyone's going to talk about it. We don't need to get into it. That is fine. And then there's another thing that I do think is going to happen. We're going to be particularly aggressive on it. When it comes to R&D, one of the things that is so frustrating is less than 10% of all NIH funding goes to women's health. And women have traditionally been the caregivers in the family. And we saw through COVID that women put off preventative screenings routinely to take care of others, and that became really a crisis that no one is talking about, where we now have increased rates of breast cancer, cervical cancer, uterine cancer. They're finding this later because we have continued to put this off. So preventative screenings are going to take a huge bump and a front seat in what we work on come the 119th Congress.
Awesome. So one fun question that we usually do at the end. I've perhaps been tipped off by your staff to ask if you have any hidden talents, perhaps around rodeos.
Oh, we're going to talk about this around rodeos. So I rodeoed for about 23 years. I was a barrel racer. I was a rodeo queen, so I can carry the American flag going around full speed in the arena. But the thing that I am most proud of, and it's no secret, is when I was 6 years old, I was the Colorado State mutton busting champion. And for those of you that are unfamiliar with mutton busting, it is where you ride sheep like a bucking bull. Yes. Yeah, Google it. It is highly entertaining, watching little kids get thrown off by these very aggressive sheep. Yes.
This is one of the best fun facts I've ever heard.
Yeah.
Congresswoman Kimmick, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for being here. We so appreciate it.
Thank you for highlighting our caregivers.
Welcoming back to the stage, Maya Goldman.
Hello again. Our next guest is the leader at the HHS Administration for Community Living. She's performing the duties of ACL's Administrator and Assistant Secretary for Aging. Welcome, Maura Carlson. Good morning. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having us, and thank you for hosting this. I mean,
Absolutely.
It's so important, and just the fact that we're all here this morning, I'm so glad that this issue is continuing to get so much visibility.
Yeah, definitely. I want to set the stage a little, because ACL is a little more under the radar than some other HHS offices. When you talk about community living, what does that actually mean? Why is it important, and how does that relate to family caregiving?
Absolutely. Well, ACL brings together long-standing Older Americans Act programs, as well as programs for people with disabilities and also their caregivers. So what our mission is to enable everybody who wants to live in the community to stay in the community and thrive. So in particular, the caregiving issues are so critical. As we've been hearing all morning, without family caregivers, without a strong direct care workforce, people at risk at institutions will end up there. So we fund an array of human services, everything from caregiving supports to services for people with disabilities and older adults as well. Everybody has heard of our senior nutrition plans. One of the bigger providers of that is Meals on Wheels, and we also fund, we also work with, across the government, so we work with housing and urban development on housing issues for our populations, transportation, and things like that.
Yeah, and what do, how do caregivers, what role do caregivers play in community living?
there would not be community living without caregivers. And family givers in particular are really the backbone of our long-term services and support system. So helping caregivers is absolutely at the core of our mission as well. And we have a variety of programs in law and statute that are designed to really provide those supports for caregivers. And we've spoken a little bit about the intersection of caregiving, family caregiving, and direct care workforce pieces. And we've also been really pleased over the last 4 years to really focus on the direct care workforce and the intersection of how a strong direct care workforce really enables family caregivers to continue to provide that care.
Yeah, absolutely. And family caregivers aren't just parents caring for children, adult children caring for parents. You guys have done some work on grandparents caring for their grandchildren.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit more about that and what those unique needs are.
Well, we have a federal advisory committee called Supporting Grandparents, Supporting Grandchildren, and this need is growing. That advisory committee, as well as another advisory committee that we have that works on family caregiving in general, developed a 2022 national strategy on family caregiving that we, across the government, have really been implementing over the last 2 years. So we really want to think broadly about family caregiving. It's, as you said, it's grandparents raising grandchildren, it's a sandwich generation, it's also older adults themselves caring for children who may be people with disabilities. So there's a lot of iterations on that, and we have to make sure everybody's included.
Yeah. What kind of training is needed for family caregivers? How do we improve that infrastructure?
Well, right now training is really, it's wholly inadequate. And the administration has done some really exciting things, I think, to incentivize that care. So my colleagues at the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services have finalized a rule in the finalized as part of a rule in the Medicare program, the ability to have Medicare pay for training for family caregivers. We've also had other pieces where my colleagues at the Health Resources Services Administration are leveraging their 2,700 health centers to make sure that family caregivers are trained properly. I mean, it's an essential piece, but it's obviously one part of a bigger solution.
Yeah. We just heard from a congresswoman. What do you think Congress should do to help advance ACL's mission and advance family caregivers' needs?
Well, in our budget, we have consistently asked for more funding for these programs. We are seeing real movement with the resources we can have, but of course, more are always needed. So we really are committed, and if you look through the president's budgets, we've always asked for more money. We think we have great authority to do so, but we are, for example, funding a number of states, red states, blue states, to work together to start thinking about some solutions to the direct care workforce. We have grants going out to states to help implement the national strategy on family caregiving. It would be fantastic to have more states be able to participate in those programs, for instance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, money is always where the rubber meets the road,
exactly.
Right? Yeah. You're part of the Biden administration. You guys are moving out in a couple weeks. What do you think is the administration's legacy on caregiving?
The administration has really tried to take we had the caregiving EO, which was really instrumental to putting some spotlight on this work. There's been a real concerted effort across all of government in this. And we've also I believe we've also really catalyzed an all-of-society approach. The National Family Caregiver Strategy is supported by a wide variety of aging and disability advocates and policy experts. And we really, I think, have left this area much stronger than it's been before between our investments and even just kind of making sure that people in different parts of the government are talking and really thinking about these. The national strategy had 350 federal actions. All of them have been completed or nearing completion.
Wow.
And that is a significant legacy that we are all very, very proud of.
Yeah. What does it mean that caregiving is more in the conversation now? Like, what's the implication of that?
Nothing gets done unless there's attention and daylight on an issue. So really, the fact that this is getting so much attention, the fact that it is, as the Congresswoman said, this is a bipartisan issue. As Rosalind Carter said, all of us have either been a caregiver, are a caregiver, will be a caregiver, or will need care at some point. So this is an everybody issue.
Yeah. I find that sometimes talking about caregiving before it's needed is just a really difficult conversation to have. It's emotional. People don't want to think about their family members in that situation. How do we get people to think about this preemptively?
Well, a lot of it is conversations like this. And a lot of it is really making sure that people are, I think part of it is just education like this. Part of it is the healthcare workforce, making sure that they're talking to people. A lot of it is just having gone through it once. Personally, my mother was a caregiver for her mother. She lived with us for many years. And then I was a caregiver for my father. And now at some point, hopefully later, I will be a caregiver for my mother. And, even with my mother having been a caregiver before, those are still difficult conversations, but I also think that as more people are doing this, it's just becoming more of a topic of conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm also curious how you see technology changing caregiving these days. What are you noticing on that?
There is a lot of work. We also run an assistive technology program, so there's just a lot of supports that people can use. Some are more traditional, even like handrails in bathrooms and other home modifications, but we're seeing a lot of really interesting things technology-wise in the assisted technology area that really can enhance people's, not just the caregiving side, but also enhance the quality of life and really make it possible for people to thrive and remain in the community.
Yeah, you don't think about handrails as technology, but I guess that's like the original technology,
yes.
right?
We're moving past that, but again, those things are essential. And again, those are types of things that the Older Americans Act, which we administer at ACL, help pay for.
Yeah. You mentioned respite care a little earlier in our conversation. I know ACL has done some work on that. What improvements do you want to see to the way that respite care is delivered?
Increasing availability and making sure that people know that it's available. We have a respite care program at ACL, and again, just being able to expand the reach of that program would be fantastic.
Yeah. What is the ultimate goal there for how that looks?
The ultimate goal is anybody who is a family caregiver who needs respite care to self-care themselves, to stay in the workforce can get it. It's really a essential component, and it really, again, links back to the direct care workforce. You can't have sufficient respite care when you don't have a sufficient, strong direct care workforce. And right now, for example, we have a 50% turnover rate in that workforce. So all of these issues, as we're seeing this morning, are completely linked.
Yeah, definitely. What is your message to the next administration's leader of ACL? Backing up,
ACL, we administer programs that have been on the books for decades. They are bipartisan issues. The work that the previous Trump administration did on caregiving was important. I think we've just taken absolutely gigantic strides, and I think the mood at ACL is really hopeful that the Trump administration, we can kind of pass the baton to them, because again, these are really bipartisan issues. These are programs that have been in the statute for decades. So we are hopeful.
Yeah. And if you could wave your magic wand, what is Maura's vision for caregiving in 10 years? What does it look like?
That we have a really strong direct care workforce that is available to help everybody who wants to stay in their home and work with family caregivers. Family caregivers, like I said, are the backbone, but they are just not supported. And to do so, we really have to address the crisis in the direct care workforce. So making sure there's higher wages, there's retention, there's the workforce is so undervalued right now, and really making sure that that is a pathway for a successful career. And when that comes together, a lot of these other pieces, I think, that is by far the trickiest, I think, of these issues. And when that happens, I think we can really get to a better place.
Yeah. It's hard to think about, like I said, when you will need care and when you have to care for your parents. Yeah. But it's all, it's something that everybody can relate to in the world.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. As we round out our conversation here, I would love to hear a story or two that you've heard in your time working with caregivers at ACL. What's something that stuck with you from your conversations with people that you've talked to?
That is a great question, and I'm trying to go back through. I mean, we just actually brought together a roundtable of caregivers last month, so trying to think of that. I think really the need for caregivers to be able to meet people where they are. I heard a story of a family, and the grandmother does not speak English, and the additional added difficulty of finding a Spanish-speaking caregiver in their community really was a tremendous burden. And finally finding somebody who could provide some respite care and who they could work with. And I think that it's an issue for all of us. It is a particular challenge for certain communities, and I think those stories about those additional challenges really have stuck with me.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much.
And
thank you all for being here.
That's all the time we have today. Thank you, everybody, for being here. To our audience and to those online, we really appreciate you coming out. For a deeper dive on what you saw today, you can subscribe to Axios Vitals, Axios Healthcare Pro, and all of our other Axios newsletters. Have a good day.